it's just one of the defining characteristics of of this being an underworld, right? Like you are cut off from the sun, right? But so what does that mean to you? And actually, going back to the our game we're playing today, and its sort of cousins, right? Like again, like the sort of like the day and night cycle there is important, but also it's another area where I found that Minecraft for me was a big influence, right? If you look at the creature design in that game, right, with like things that only come out at night are the most obvious, but then you have like spiders who are aggressive only at night, right? Or there's a lot of you tend to think of the monsters in that game as pretty simple, but when you look at like what is there, it is all deeply tied into the core game systems, right? Either changing terrain or either affecting or responding to the cycle of light and darkness. The undead that burst into flames when they get hit by daylight, right? Like there's very little in that game that is not tied into the core game systems outside of just like the combat encounters. All right, so we're back into the back on day one here with a new base of operations. We'll see if we can get past day 5 this time.
Well, I don't know if we have enough time for Will to make it.
No, probably not.
Is there anything in this game that affects the flow of time? How fast it goes?
There's things that will let you basically skip a night. The bedroll and the tent. Speaking before of ways to get sanity back, right? It's actually possible to sleep in this game. This is not a command to just like sleep. You need a bedroll or a tent. And when you do that, the entire night passes and you get a whole bunch of sanity back. But your hunger meter goes way down. More so for whatever reason than if you had just passed the night awake. Like I think that's clearly just a game mechanical contrivance, right? Like to make sure that there's a strong trade-off there, because from a situational like standpoint, like why staying up all night like is less hungry work than sleeping through it is not something that makes any.
In the early game, I find the night cycle actually to be relaxing, right? Because you can't do much. Other than if you have some scientific things to build, you can do that. Or if you want to craft some other stuff, you actually have time because you can't be gathering food, you can't be doing other things.
Yeah, I find at nighttime and Don't Starve is often when I'll finally stop, look at my map, plan my upcoming day, and sort of reassess my goals, which is sort of gets into a bigger topic, right? Like a lot of games beyond the most trivial ones have different kind of modes of play you can be in, and simply planning is one of those, right? One way that this reflects itself game mechanically, right, is if you have any kind of situation that blocks you from progress on one play mode, right? Like how does the game hand you off into another play mode? Is definitely an interesting topic. Especially with anything that just depends on time. You just have to wait a certain amount of time before something can happen.
So wait a second. You actually plan things in this game?
Yeah, you'd better. You found the. I don't know what to call this set piece. There's probably a name for it, but this is the set piece where the wooden thing is. If you can assemble all the other things at this wooden thing, that's how you exit the world. But there's these weird chess piece robot dudes who don't want you to even be here. So there's that.
Yeah, you're done.
Jump in the wormhole.
Oh my goodness! I would have burned the forest down, but I didn't have time. I should have burned them all down.
That is your answer to everything.
So it was just funny listening to you two because, you're both, fairly, you're system designers, right? So you're like, oh, I sit here and I plan it out and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I just stand there and wait. It's the most boring 5 minutes of my life while playing this game. Question. How are you planning to use food in the game? Will it be simple hit point regen, or will it be more complex effects such as well-fed stat, blah, blah, blah?
There's only a little bit that is decided about that. We are very, very interested in having food be an issue, right? Like I think that's a core thing in the kind of wilderness survival aesthetic that we want. Like one of the things that makes you feel like a prisoner in this space, right? Is not having your needs entirely attended to. At the same time, like having the sort of typical like food gets you hit points thing. There's like two main approaches, right? Like the one is food gets you hit points, and the other is like food prevents a condition that takes away all your hit points, right? Where like you just eventually get hungry and starve and die. Probably more the latter than the former. Another thing that I've been looking at, I felt like a lot of the survival pressure in Underworld 1 was kind of alleviated too quickly by some of the spells that were available. Create food was an easy spell to come by. The low-level healing spells were kind of easy to come by. So I'm interested in looking at opportunities to make more of that sort of stuff either higher level or more resource limited, right? Where instead of just having direct effects, you need some kinds of materials to do your magic with. So if there's food that just heals your hit points, it'll probably be because you cast a spell to make the food do that magical thing, right? But we'll see, right? Like that's just sort of a stake in the ground that we're going to play with. It's definitely still one of those things that we're looking at different approaches.
Isn't it interesting that I was just thinking of this back when back in our younger years, if you ever put hunger in a game, people would have rebelled, and here we are playing a game that is basically around hunger as a mechanic.
Yeah, it's true. Though a game that like just had the amount of food pressure in it that Don't Starve has, like only by making the game like kind of all about that is it something that works, right?
Right.
That is interesting. And one thing that you find, I think in indie games these days, which is kind of a lot like the early days of games, a lot more things can be the entire topic of a game.
Right.
Right. Like early when like there weren't really established genres, people were like just playing around, like making games about all kinds of different things. And then there was kind of a long period of game types getting like really firmly established. But a lot of the sort of experimentation about what a game could be about went away in that process. And now with the availability of more of an indie game scene, you're seeing a lot more of that being possible again, which is great.
Another question: will there be diseases and curses?
Don't know.
This is New England, so there's a good chance that we will all have diseases and be cursed by the weather and by our Red Sox team on a regular basis around here.
Yeah, it kind of brings up the broader issue of status conditions and their sort of relationship to gameplay in RPGs. So I'm looking not just at diseases and stuff like that, but things like, oh man, there's a long list: fear, confusion, and even like blindness and deafness, and like there's all these things that like some of it works better in paper RPGs, some of it works better in computer RPGs, but just like trying to not edit us down too much yet on what the possibilities are there. Some of that as well is being driven again by the design of the spell system, like so things that the kinds of categories of spells that should exist in terms of more than just throwing things at other things that knock down some of their hit points, right? You want, at least I want to have more qualitatively different effects that you can cause on things. So So the broad answer there is I don't know about diseases, curses specifically, more generally in terms of like different negative status conditions that players and non-players can have. That is something that I expect there to definitely be some variety of.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely looking at those not only from the spell perspective or creature inflicting them on you perspective, but also environment. So things like heat, cold.
Yes, good point.
You want to have that sense that the environment is also trying to kill you if you're not careful, if you're not prepared.
Kashira adds on, one of my favorite things in Wasteland 2 was accidentally drinking from a contaminated well and getting a nasty worm infection. And I'll say that for world building, it's those kind of small moments that can actually make a world feel so much bigger than than maybe it really is. It adds a level of details that really bring the world alive.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that also in some of the sort of like classic Dungeons and Dragons tropes, right? Like things like
rot grubs
and ear seekers and all the green slimes and things that just like, again, like part of it is just this sense of environmental hazard and how knowledge of what the possible hazards are gives you more mastery of your environment, right? Like what to even watch out for, right? Like not everything that's trying to kill you is going to stand up and shake a sword at you and say, I'm going to try to kill you.
Right. And I think that comes back to the whole ecology thing that we've talked about, is that these things have a mind of their own, and you're not necessarily part of that at the moment. Actually, Don't Starve here does a really good job of this, is that there's all these ambient creatures, and they're not necessarily all hostile to you all the time. It's only when you're kind of a jerk that...
So in your case, always.
I see, like that bee. I mean, what did I do? You were with me yesterday. What did I do? First thing I did, I walked up and I hit it.
Yeah. It's like, oh, look, it's a bee. Can I hit it?
Oh, and then I had like a pack of red killer bees after me, right?
Yeah. No. Let's see. Oh, seventh key asks, will food deteriorate? Moldy pieces of cheese? Good question. We don't know yet. We honestly don't know yet about that one. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Another thing is, like, there's extremes there too, right? Like, coming back to Don't Starve, like that's a big issue with almost all the kinds of food. There's some exceptions where like we see Will is evading a tall bird here. Tall bird eggs don't actually rot. Even though, like most of the food in Don't Starve, like once you get to the point where you're not just starving, like you start having the issue of like, well, how am I going to keep my food from rotting? And then there's these few foods that don't, right? So there's actually like, you can go all the way from like no food rots to all food rots to some kinds do and some don't, and questions about what the rate is. So let's put a pin in all of that actually to come back to when we work on this system.
Egg thief.
Oh, delicious grub kebab roast bite. I'm still nostalgic for the rotworm stew recipe in Underworld 1. So you have that written somewhere. You totally got me when it comes to grub kebab.
Right. So when it comes to that kind of crafting, I mean, do we expect to see some of that in our game?
I think food crafting is one of the we don't know everything about what kind of crafting system we want to have, but I think food is going to be like one of the first things, right? Because it's kind of central to that feeling of like, I'm in a place where my needs are not being met the way that they normally would be, right? Like I'm out of my element, and so like having to, what did you do to piss off that tall bird?
That's some serious aggro.
But yeah, like food crafting is definitely one of the things that I think like does a really good job of achieving that feel. And then another thing, actually, like speaking of the rotworm stew in Underworld 1, right? Like another big part of that is just like taking things that people in our target audience's cultures would not normally think of as food, right?